Gabriel, and welcome to another episode of Metis Time Capsule. You're, of course, with your host, Alexandria Anthony. And before we get right into today's episode, I would like to include some more Bungi, also known as the Red River dialect, in our show. And I hope you can hear the excitement, the passion in my voice, because Métis Indigenous languages are something that I'm so very passionate about. It's very important that along with our culture and our heritage that we preserve these languages. And really, dialects such as Bungi are just so essential because they are really a part of our identity, and they make us unique and give us a real sense of belonging. And it's important too, growing up in Selkirk, that I was able to be in the presence and hear some old timers that were fluent in Bungi, the Red River dialect. So it's something that I would like to see revived. Some people are saying that it's extinct, on the verge of being extinct. We cannot let this happen, and it's so very important for our youth. A little bit about Thomas Bunn. A lot of you may not be familiar with who Thomas Bunn is. And Thomas Bunn built his house on the banks of the Red River in 1862. And he and his wife Rachel were flooded out of their house in the Kildonan district of Winnipeg in Manitoba, Canada, in the Great Flood of 1852. And Thomas, being a good husband, he told Rachel that he would build her a house that would never again be affected by floodwaters. And I think that's important, and that sort of ties into our story. And Bunns Road is located near East Selkirk in Manitoba, Canada, of course. And here are some of Bungi, of course, the Red River dialect. And just listen very closely. And of course, Bungi really is a mixture of the English, Scottish, Gaelic, Cree, and Ojibwe languages. Oh, I dust down the road, along the river. 'Twill ever stand forever, I'm thinking. Every morning, back and forth, he come across from the stone fort. He worked there by me who's mind these walls are stone and 3 foot thick, I's tired of the flutist. I so calm this rovers being no, don't be fooled. Come sprink these revers, he's a very wicked. Up south in Kildonan, and don't that river nigh on took our hoose in the big flood of 52. Mana people lost everything. Oh, my heritage ached. We fled many miles to the pains and had a sweet time. Mine thanks to my Thomas Bunn, fiend and comfortable. We are certainly and slavant foot hind from the river. We not flood here. So interesting dialect from Rachel Bunn on the flooding of her home. I will be sharing more Bungi episodes in the coming shows because I think it's very important. And again, it is my passion. And this brings us right into today's segment. Who has heard of the Métis battle standard flag? Has any of you? Are you familiar with this particular flag? And the Métis battle standard flag of 1885 was flown, of course, in the battle during the Battle of Batoche, and it gave and symbolized those defending our homelands that pride and courage. And here's a quote on what it says on this particular flag, and I quote, "In the house, at the altar, above all freedom, we raise our hand to the Creator with the spirit and courage of the wolf." End of quote. Very powerful, poignant quote. And the flag itself was sewn together and designed by the Métis women who were protecting the Métis children along the riverbanks. They would be also making bullets, of course, by melting tin cans they had, and then after nursing the children, they would be delivering the ammo and supplies to those on the battlefield in their traditional dresses. And this ties in, and you're going to see it as I speak more. This is how Batoche and the wolves, and keep in mind the wolves, the term the wolves, fit together with our episode today. And September 24th, let's go back into our Métis time capsule. Let's roll the planes. Let's roll back to September 24th, 1884 at Batoche in the presence. And can you just imagine the presence of these amazing leaders, these amazing Métis legends, the presence of Louis Riel and Gabriel Dumont. The Métis at this particular time founded the Association Nationale Metisse. And this is when Riel chose Saint Joseph as the patron saint. And shortly afterwards, the name was changed to La Union Nationale Metisse. And in any case, uh, the origins really can be traced back, of course, to Batoche. And Batoche days being in this month of July, very important, this story ties in great. And the founding members of La Union Nationale Métis, the founding members were Pierre Delorme, Alfred No, Ambrose Didam, Lepine, Benjamin Nault, Francois Frobisher, Charles Guéthenon, Abraham Guy, Augustine Harrison, Martin Jerome, Elzaire Lajmodier, Pierre Lavallée, Louis Lepine, Francois Marion, Joseph Macmillan, Jean-Baptiste Plouffe, Francois Portris, Alexandre Riel, and this is the key person, Joseph Riel, Joseph Saint Germain, Joseph Saint Germain, who is the son, Pierre Saint Germain, Henri Thoreau, Antoine Vermette, and William Vermette. So these are the founding members when the name was changed, La Union Nationale Métis. And La Réunion Nationale Métis Saint Joseph de Manitoba was founded July 17th, 1887 in Saint Vital, Manitoba. And they were to really form a new Métis cultural and historical organization. And it was incorporated, of course, March 1st, 1888. And listen, this is so very important. This is, as we call it today, a mission statement, but this was its main purpose was to really restore Métis pride and thus create meaning for their identity. And that kind of mirrors what's really going on with a lot of Métis politics, a lot of Métis organizations, Métis governments going on today. So trying to really restore Métis pride and, of course, thus create meaning for their identity. Also, an important milestone that a lot of you may not be aware of, that in 1891 they erected a monument on Louis Riel's tomb in the St. Boniface Cathedral Cemetery in St. Boniface, Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. And also interesting to note that in another milestone is in 1909, the leaders of the Métis Nation met, and this is a key point. They met in Joseph Riel's home in St. Vital, Manitoba, and of course, these men were the ones who survived. They were the survivors. They survived the Red River resistance of 1869 to 1870 and the Northwest resistance, of course, of 1885. And with them at this particular meeting were their younger siblings and some younger men who were really the next generation of Métis. The men who met in 1909 in Joseph Riel's home, uh, it has been written on a lot of papers, a lot of different points that they had many names. And one of the many names that they have was Les Anciens or Les Fidèles El Real. And some references have been made to calling these individuals, these survivors, as wolves. So, you can really, I can, and I'm sure you can really see the similarities between wolves, how they are in packs and they're very protective. They have a lot of pride. So I get it. I can see where the reference point to wolves would have came from. And again, these men were on a mission, and I think it was a very important mission to tell the truth about the Métis people. And it's important for them to have their truth out of the Métis Nation. And they were using the term nation at that particular time of the Canadian Northwest. So their mission was of the utmost important. And we will call them, and again, the wolves or the ones that fought bravely with Louis Riel. They felt, and they felt so strongly that the stories about the Métis Nation and Louis Riel being printed in the Canadian media, and the books of their day were, and this is important, these are the key facts, that they were illegitimate, one sided, and they were really a propaganda campaign that, in their minds, justified the government's denial of the Metis Nation's really existence and the disposition of the Métis from their homes and their lands. That particular night, that meeting of these survivors, these Métis men, that night they really vowed to take action. They wanted to act, and they vowed to tell their stories and to really put a rebuttal about the inaccuracies and the attacks on the Métis Nation. And you'll hear throughout this segment the term Métis Nation. It's used, there's historical reference, and they wanted the nation to be alive, breathing, alive and well. And they vowed to commemorate Louis Riel, to really, and this is important, and again, where languages come in, to promote the Michif language and defend Métis rights. They really would tell their history. The history belonged to them because they lived the history, they breathed the history, they survived the history. So they would tell their history as they knew it from firsthand accounts. They knew it, they lived it. And again, in reference, the wolves, the survivors, the Métis men, they created a historical committee that was tasked, their duty, their task, to tell again their story, the story they lived, they breathed, they put their life on the line. Efforts were focused on really what the Canadians were calling the Riel rebellions. And these individuals, these survivors, these wolves, they really hated with a passion, they hated the term rebellion. And to them, the word rebellion was a group of people who took up arms to separate from the country or to overthrow or undermine the government. And the Métis Nation at that particular time in history had never done. They had taken up arms only to defend their lands and to defend their Métis rights. They never believed fighting for their rights was a rebellion, that they didn't consider it. The terminology rebellion wasn't what they felt it was. And this to them was a distinction that they insisted on, and they insisted on rectifying this, that the term was not used, it was rectified. They also, and this is very important too, and I encourage you to look deeper into this on your own and get a copy if you can. They decided to really publish, and this is instrumental, to publish their own history of the Métis Nation. And the historical committee they took the time to take sworn declarations from Métis survivors, the men who the men still alive who had played key roles, key positions in the Red River resistance of 1869, 1870, and of course in the Northwest resistance of 1885. Affidavits were taken in the year 1909 and also twice in the year 1929. Also, the committee visited the site of Batoche and virtually, can you put this into, I can just visually, just close your eyes, visually, the whole town came to their community meetings. That's unity, folks. That's working together. That is unity. They also hired Auguste du Tremedon to be the author of their history. And Auguste was born, of course, in Quebec, July 14th, 1874. He was, of course, educated in France, and during the 1920s, he published extensively on Louis Riel and the Red River Rebellion, and based really chiefly on access that he was given in particular to unpublished Louis Riel papers. So History de la Nation Métisse which was completed in 1929 and of course published in 1935. Unfortunately, August passed away before it could get published. And also interesting to note, another date historic milestone, that in 1910. So you remember, let's backtrack. 1909, they had the meeting in Joseph Riel's home in Saint Vital. Now, jumping forward a year, 1910, they created a Métis national flag. And it's interesting, some of you may not have never seen this flag, and it's a white background with a Union Jack in the top left-hand corner, and it also includes 3 gold fleur-de-lis in other corners. And it's interesting. A lot of people may question and may say, well, how do we know about these old timers or these wolves, survivors? They left notes and papers behind. So it's very important they left stuff behind. There are also copies of Riel's writing and also Métis Nation meeting notes from the early 1870s. So it's interesting to know as well that Union Nationale Métis Saint Joseph du Manitoba is said to be one of the oldest Métis cultural institutions, and their history community, we call them the wolves, the old timers, were really founded to counter anti-Métis bias in many Canadian history books. So you can see how we see a revitalization where the term, by this organization that met in Joseph Riel's home, they wanted to rectify, they wanted to bring Métis pride back, and they wanted to try and write their truths, their stories in the history book so we could all learn, and to really counter again the anti-Métis bias that was happening in many Canadian history books. And these wolves, these men, these brave Métis men, they fought with Riel, and they fought and ensured that they told their story, their truth again, and stressing the importance to tell, preserve their nation's history. So I hope you found this interesting, and if you can get a copy of the History de la Nation Métis, which is probably going to be in French, published in 1935. I had been reading some pages of it. My French is a little bit rusty, but I get the gist of it. It's very, very important to see and to read how these men fought and wanted to preserve the legacy, the history of Louis Riel, and to really preserve Métis rights and culture, and how they made reference to, they really hated the word rebellion, and again, creating a historical community to tell their story, to tell their truth. Again, they felt that Canadian media, books of their particular time were illegitimate, one-sided, and again, propaganda campaigns. So again, I hope you enjoyed this segment of Métis Time Capsule. It was an extreme pleasure to speak again. Bungi, Red River Dialect. I'm working on getting more episodes of these on because it's something that we should preserve, learn. And again, I hope you enjoyed the part of the wolves, the old timers, the survivors that fought with Louis Riel to share and try and preserve the history of the Métis Nation, the real history of the Métis Nation, Métis people, spoken, remembered, and lived by the Métis people. Thank you very much.